There's a seat on Mount Olympus that stands empty, not because it was never filled, but because the goddess who once occupied it walked away. She was one of the original 12 Olympians, born before Zeus claimed his throne, older than the king of gods himself, more ancient than the cosmic order that would come to define Greek civilization. Her name was Hestia. And here's what they don't tell you in mythology class, what gets erased from every retelling, what makes her the most radical figure in the entire Greek pantheon. She chose to be forgotten. She gave up her throne, her seat at the table of cosmic power, her place among the great gods who shaped reality itself. She stepped down voluntarily, walked away from divine politics and eternal glory, and asked for something that no other god had ever requested: to be left alone, to tend to the fire, to exist at the center of everything while being noticed by no one. And in doing so, in making herself invisible, she became the most powerful force in Greek civilization. This is the story of the goddess who understood that true power doesn't announce itself, that the most essential things are often the least visible, that sometimes the greatest act of strength is knowing what you don't need. Think about that for a moment. In a mythology obsessed with glory, with Kleos, with eternal fame and legendary deeds, with gods and heroes who would literally die before being forgotten, there existed a goddess who actively chose obscurity, who saw the throne of Olympus, the seat of cosmic authority, the position that gods and titans fought wars to claim, and said, "I don't want it. Give it to someone else. I'll stay by the fire." The ancient Greeks understood that this was profound, that Hestia's choice represented something deeper than simple humility or lack of ambition. They put her first in every prayer, first in every sacrifice, first in every ritual that connected mortals to the divine. They built her altars in the center of every home, every temple, every city. They swore their most sacred oaths in her name. But they told almost no stories about her. They created no epic poems celebrating her deeds. They carved no dramatic sculptures depicting her adventures. She existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, the goddess at the heart of civilization who left no myths behind. And that absence, that deliberate erasure, that choice to be forgotten, that's the whole point. Let's start at the beginning, which is also the end, which is also the middle, because Hestia's story operates outside the normal flow of mythological narrative. She was born first, the firstborn child of Rhea and Kronos, the titans who ruled before the Olympians, the cosmic parents who would become infamous for the most disturbing family dynamic in all of mythology. Hestia was the first to be born, which means she was also the first to be swallowed. Kronos, terrified by the prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, consumed each baby moments after birth. Hestia went first into the darkness, into the belly of a titan, into an existence that wasn't quite life and wasn't quite death, but something suspended between the two. She spent longer in that void than any of her siblings. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, they all lived in that impossible prison, but Hestia was there the longest. And when Zeus finally freed them, when he gave Kronos the poison that made him vomit up his children, Hestia came out last. First to be swallowed, last to be freed. The oldest and the youngest simultaneously, the beginning and the end in one divine being. That paradox shaped everything about who Hestia became. She remembered the darkness longer than any of her siblings. She understood what it meant to exist in a state of pure potential, waiting to be born into a world that might never come. She emerged into a cosmos at war, where her younger brother was leading a rebellion against her father, where titans and gods were tearing reality apart, where power was the only currency that mattered, and survival required violence. And Hestia, ancient and newborn, looked at this world and made a decision that would define her forever. She would have nothing to do with it. She fought in the war, because everyone fought in the war, because the Titanomachy required every available god just to have a chance at victory. But when it was over, when Zeus claimed the sky and Poseidon took the seas, and Hades drew the underworld, when the remaining Olympians were dividing up domains and responsibilities and shares of cosmic authority, Hestia asked for something different. She asked for the hearth. the fire at the center of every home, the flame that cooked food and provided warmth and marked the difference between civilization and wilderness. She asked to be everywhere and nowhere essential and invisible, the foundation that everyone needed but no one noticed. And in doing so, in making herself invisible, she became the most powerful force in Greek civilization. This is the story of the goddess who understood that true power doesn't announce itself, that the most essential things are often the least visible, that sometimes the greatest act of strength is knowing what you don't need. The seat she gave up on Olympus went to Dionysus, the god of wine and madness and religious ecstasy, the wild young god who was everything Hestia wasn't: dramatic, changeable, excessive, demanding attention. Some versions of the myth say Hestia stepped down to avoid conflict between Apollo and Dionysus, both of whom wanted that 12th seat, both of whom were willing to fight for it. Some versions say she simply realized that sitting in councils, listening to gods argue about territory and honor and petty grudges, was a waste of her immortal existence. Some versions say nothing at all about why she left, because the whole point of Hestia is that her reasons don't need explanation or justification. She wanted peace. She got it. End of story. Or rather, end of stories, plural, because after she gave up her throne, the myths about her basically stop. She appears in the background sometimes, maintaining the sacred fire, present at important moments but never central to them, like a stagehand that keeps the production running while the actors take their bows. But the absence of myths doesn't mean the absence of importance. In fact, with Hestia, it means the opposite. Every Greek home had a hearth, and every hearth was sacred to Hestia. When you entered someone's house, you honored Hestia first before greeting your host. When a baby was born, it was carried around the hearth to place it under Hestia's protection. When a marriage was formed, fire from the bride's family hearth was carried to the new household to establish continuity, to bind the couple to Hestia's eternal flame. When colonies were established, fire from the mother city's hearth traveled with the colonists to their new home, linking them across distance through Hestia's presence. She was the goddess who made houses into homes, who transformed cooking fires into altars, who turned the most mundane daily activities into sacred rituals. You couldn't escape Hestia even if you wanted to. She was in every meal, every gathering, every moment of warmth and safety and belonging. But she never demanded worship in the way other gods did. She never required grand temples or elaborate festivals or dramatic sacrifices. She just asked that you not let the fire go out. That's a strange kind of power, isn't it? The power of the essential thing that no one thinks about. The power of infrastructure, of maintenance, of the endless, unglamorous work that keeps civilization functioning. Zeus had the lightning bolt and the throne and the ultimate authority. Athena had wisdom and warfare and strategic genius. Apollo had prophecy and music and healing. Artemis had the hunt and the moon and wild places. All the major gods had domains that were exciting, that generated stories, that gave them opportunities for intervention and glory in memorable myths. Hestia had the fire. The cooking fire, the one that heated soup and baked bread and kept children from freezing in winter, the least exciting, most necessary thing in existence. And she protected it with the same divine power that Zeus used to throw lightning bolts and Poseidon used to create earthquakes. She just did it quietly. So quietly that most people forgot she was doing it at all. There's a philosophical concept here that the ancient Greeks understood better than we do today: the difference between power and influence. Power is loud. Power is visible. Power announces itself and demands recognition. Influence is quiet. Influence is invisible. Influence works through systems and structures and the slow, patient work of shaping what people consider normal. Zeus had power. Hestia had influence. And in the long run, influence always wins, because influence doesn't create resistance the way power does. You can rebel against a king. You can't rebel against the hearth. You can overthrow a tyrant. You can't overthrow the fire that cooks you food. Hestia embedded herself so deeply into the structure of Greek life that removing her would have meant dismantling civilization itself. And she did it without ever raising her voice, without ever throwing a lightning bolt, without ever turning anyone into an animal or cursing anyone's children, or engaging in any of the dramatic divine interventions that fill Greek mythology. She just tended the fire, and the fire became everything. But let's talk about what Hestia gave up when she chose her path, because understanding the sacrifice helps us understand the choice. She was one of the 3 virgin goddesses in Greek mythology, along with Athena and Artemis, but her virginity meant something different than theirs. Athena was virgin because she was born from Zeus's head, because she represented a kind of transcendent intellect that existed beyond gender and sexuality. Artemis was virgin because she was wild, untamed, autonomous, refusing to be possessed or domesticated by any man or god. Hestia was virgin because she wanted peace, because she understood that in Greek society, in Greek mythology, in the cosmic order that Zeus established, sexuality meant politics. Every relationship was a potential alliance or conflict. Every child was a claim to power, a piece in the eternal game of divine succession. Every marriage was a binding contract that created obligations and expectations and the potential for betrayal. Hestia looked at that entire system and opted out, not because she was asexual or because she hated intimacy or because she was afraid of relationships, but because she recognized that participating in that system would make peace impossible. Both Poseidon and Apollo wanted to marry her. Think about that. 2 of the most powerful gods in the pantheon, the god of the seas and the god of prophecy and music, both pursued Hestia. Both offered her what they thought was an honor, marriage to a major Olympian, a position of power and influence, children who would be legendary, a life of cosmic significance. And Hestia refused them both. She went to Zeus and swore on the river Styx, the most unbreakable vow in existence, that she would remain virgin forever. And Zeus, recognizing both the seriousness of her request and the potential for conflict if Apollo and Poseidon continued to compete for her, agreed immediately. He granted her protections, he gave her autonomy. He essentially said, "You are free from all of this, from the marriage politics and the sexual dynamics and the endless maneuvering for power. You are outside the system." And Hestia, finally safe, finally free, retreated to the hearth and never looked back. There's something profound and profoundly sad about that choice. Hestia could have been queen. She was older than Hera, ancient than the queen of heaven herself. She could have married Zeus, could have claimed the throne, could have been the goddess of marriage instead of Hera. Or she could have chosen Poseidon, ruled the seas, become the mother of legendary children. Or she could have married Apollo, combined her ancient power with his prophecy and music, created a dynasty that would have rivaled Zeus himself. She had options that most gods would kill for, and she refused all of them because she understood something that the rest of Olympus never learned. You cannot be at the center of power and at peace simultaneously. You have to choose. Hestia chose peace, and the cost of peace was possibility. She gave up children, marriage, romance, the entire sphere of intimate relationship that drives so much of human and divine experience. She gave up stories, adventures, the chance to be remembered and celebrated and worshipped as a heroic figure. She gave up her throne, her vote in divine councils, her voice in the decisions that shaped reality. She gave up almost everything except the one thing that mattered to her: autonomy. The right to exist on her own terms, undisturbed, undemanded, free. Now here's where Hestia's mythology intersects with something deeply relevant to our modern moment. She's the patron goddess of boundaries. Not in the sense that Hermes is the god of boundaries, marking the edges of property and the transitions between worlds. Hestia's boundaries are internal. She represents the right to say no, the right to opt out, the right to define your own space and defend it against intrusion, even when that intrusion comes disguised as honor or opportunity or love. In a culture that didn't really recognize women's autonomy, that treated daughters as their father's property and wives as their husband's possession, that measured female worth through relationships to men, Hestia stood alone. She belonged to no one. She served everyone by serving no one in particular. She was the goddess who proved that you could be essential without being owned, that you could be valued without being claimed, that you could be at the center of everything while maintaining absolute sovereignty over your own existence. The Romans called her Vesta, and they took her cult even more seriously than the Greeks did. The Vestal Virgins were the most prestigious religious position available to women in Rome, priestesses who tended the sacred fire in the Temple of Vesta for 30 years, sworn to chastity and service. If the fire went out, it was considered a catastrophe, a sign that Rome itself was in danger. The Vestals had privileges that no other women in Rome possessed. They could own property, they could make wills, they could testify in court. They were exempt from male guardianship. They walked through the streets with bodyguards in ceremony, and even consuls and generals made way for them. If a condemned criminal saw a Vestal virgin on his way to execution, he was automatically pardoned. That was her power in Roman society. The power of the untouchable woman who kept the fire burning, who existed outside all normal social structures, who was neither wife nor daughter nor mother, but something else entirely, something sacred in its autonomy. But the Vestals also faced the harshest punishment if they broke their vows. If a Vestal was found to have had sex, she was buried alive, not executed quickly, not granted the mercy of a swift death, but sealed in an underground chamber with a small amount of food and water and left to die slowly in darkness. The Romans believed that because Vestals were sacred, they couldn't be killed directly, so they created this horrifying loophole where they left the woman underground and let the earth kill her instead. It's brutal, it's terrifying, it's also revealing about how Romans understood Hestia's power. Her virginity wasn't just personal preference or religious devotion, it was cosmic insurance. The Vestals kept the fire burning, and the fire kept Rome safe. And if the Vestals broke their vows, if they introduced sexuality and its complications into the sacred space of Hestia's service, then the entire contract between goddess and city collapsed. Rome would fall, the fire would go out, civilization would end. So they protected the Vestals with every honor and privilege available, and they punished any violation with ultimate cruelty, because the stakes were literally the survival of Rome itself. That's how important Hestia was, not in the myths where she barely appears, but in actual practice, in the daily lives of Greeks and Romans, in the structure of their cities and homes and families. She was the goddess you couldn't ignore, even when you never thought about her. The goddess whose presence was so fundamental that it didn't need stories to maintain it. The goddess who kept everything running while everyone else was chasing glory. And here's the really interesting part. She seems to have been completely fine with that arrangement. There are no myths about Hestia being bitter or resentful or wishing for more recognition. There are no stories of her punishing people who forgot to honor her properly, no tales of divine revenge or petty jealousy or any of the behaviors that define most of the Olympians. Hestia just existed, tending the fire, being present, maintaining the center, content in a way that no other god seems to have achieved. What does it mean to be content? Real contentment, not the fake Instagram version where you post photos of your perfect life while screaming internally. The ancient Greeks would have said that contentment is autarkia, self-sufficiency, the state of needing nothing outside yourself to be complete. Hestia achieved autarkia by refusing to want what other gods wanted. She didn't need glory because she wasn't competing. She didn't need power because she wasn't trying to control anyone. She didn't need relationships because she had defined herself through internal qualities rather than external connections. She didn't need stories because she wasn't trying to be remembered. She was trying to be present. And presence, real presence, the kind that holds space for others while remaining grounded in itself, is the hardest thing any being, mortal or divine, can achieve. Hestia made it look easy. She made it look boring. She made it look like the least interesting choice a goddess could make. But anyone who's ever tried to just be, to exist without agenda or ambition or the desperate need for external validation, knows how difficult it is, how revolutionary, how radical it is to simply tend your fire and let that be enough. There's a reason Hestia's mythology feels so sparse compared to the elaborate tales of other gods. Stories require conflict. They require desire and obstacle, want and frustration, the tension between what is and what could be. Hestia had no conflict because she wanted nothing she didn't have. She had no obstacles because she wasn't trying to go anywhere. She had no tension between what she was and what she wanted to be because she had achieved perfect alignment between identity and existence. She was exactly who she wanted to be, exactly where she wanted to be, doing exactly what she wanted to do. That's not a story in the traditional sense. That's a state of being. And you can't make a state of being dramatic unless something threatens it, unless someone tries to disrupt it, unless the peace is broken by external force. But Hestia protected her peace so effectively, established her boundaries so clearly, removed herself from divine politics so completely that no one bothered her. No one had reason to. She wasn't a threat, wasn't a rival, wasn't standing in anyone's way. She was just there, at the center, burning quietly, essential and invisible. But let's not romanticize Hestia too much, because there's a darker edge to her story, a cost that we should acknowledge. By choosing peace over power, by removing herself from divine counsels and cosmic decisions, she gave up the ability to influence those decisions. While Zeus was making laws and starting wars and playing games with mortal lives, while Hera was establishing the rules of marriage, and Athena was championing heroes, and Apollo was delivering prophecies, Hestia was tending the fire. She wasn't at the table when decisions were made. She wasn't part of the conversations that shaped the cosmos. She had peace, yes. She had autonomy, absolutely. But she also had silence. She gave up her voice in exchange for being left alone. And that's a trade-off worth examining, worth questioning, worth thinking deeply about. Because sometimes the powerful rely on the peaceful to remove themselves from the conversation. Sometimes the corrupt depend on the virtuous to stay out of politics. Sometimes the people causing harm benefit enormously when the people who could stop them decide that maintaining their own peace is more important than confronting injustice. Did Hestia make the right choice? I don't know. The ancient Greeks didn't know either. They honored her above all other gods in ritual, which suggests deep respect for her decision. But they also created almost no mythology about her, which suggests a kind of collective discomfort with a goddess who refused to engage with the dramatic, violent, complicated business of divine existence. She's there and not there simultaneously, present in every prayer, absent from every story, essential to civilization, irrelevant to the myths that defined civilization's values and aspirations. Hestia occupies a strange space in Greek thought, the acknowledgement that the most important things are often the least celebrated, that peace requires sacrifice, that autonomy has costs, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is remove yourself from the fight and just tend your own fire while the world burns around you. But maybe that's exactly what makes her relevant today. In our moment of constant conflict and endless demands for engagement and perpetual outrage and the exhausting expectation that everyone must have opinions about everything and take sides in every battle, Hestia represents an alternative. The right to not participate. The right to define your own boundaries and defend them, even when people call you selfish or apathetic or privileged for doing so. The right to say, I'm going to tend my fire. I'm going to take care of my small corner of the world. I'm going to be present for the people and things that actually need me, and I'm going to stop pretending that my anxiety and anger and constant engagement with things I can't control is somehow virtuous or necessary or making any positive difference at all. Hestia is the goddess of knowing what's yours to carry and what isn't. The goddess of understanding that you can't save everyone, can't fix everything, can't participate in every fight without losing yourself completely in the process. The goddess who chose herself and made that choice sacred. There's a temple that archaeologists found, ancient beyond dating, where Hestia's altar stood not at the edges where most divine altars were placed, but dead center. At the heart of the sacred space, a circular hearth, a fire pit that had been maintained for centuries, ash layers going down and down and down into the earth like rings in a tree, each layer marking another generation that had kept the flame burning. They found tools there, simple iron implements for tending fire. They found bones from sacrifice, evidence of hundreds of meals cooked on that hearth, thousands of prayers spoken while food cooked and families gathered. They found no statues, no elaborate decorations, no expensive offerings, just the hearth. Just the ash, just the evidence of people returning again and again, generation after generation, to honor the goddess who asked for nothing except that they remember the fire. And they did remember, for centuries, for millennia. Long after the myths were forgotten and the temples to Zeus crumbled and the stories of heroic adventures faded into academic study, they remembered the hearth. They remembered Hestia. Not through stories, but through practice, through the simple act of keeping something burning. That's the legacy of a different kind, isn't it? Not the legacy of being remembered in tales and songs and epic poetry, but the legacy of being present, of being essential, of being the thing that people return to when everything else fails. When your marriage falls apart, you come home to the hearth. When your ambitions crash, you come home to the hearth. When the world is too much and the noise is too loud and you can't carry it anymore, you come home to the hearth. And there, in that simple domestic space that our modern world has mostly forgotten how to value, you find what Hestia understood all along. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. Peace is having a place to return to, a center that holds, a fire that keeps burning regardless of what's happening in the world outside. Peace is knowing that you don't have to participate in every drama, fight every battle, prove yourself in every arena. Peace is the radical act of being enough, exactly as you are, without needing glory or recognition or power to validate your existence. The seat on Olympus that Hestia gave to Dionysus remained occupied by the god of wine and madness for the rest of eternity. And there's something perfect about that, something deeply right. She gave up drama and got peace. She gave up her story and got quiet. She gave up her throne and got the hearth. And the hearth, it turns out, mattered more than the throne ever did. Because thrones fall and kingdoms collapse and cosmic orders shift. But the fire that cooks your food and warms your children and marks the center of your home, that burns forever. That's what Hestia understood. That's why she walked away from power. That's why she chose to be forgotten. Because being forgotten by history is a small price to pay for being present in life. Being absent from myths is nothing compared to being present at every hearth, every home, every moment when people gather around fire and find, in that ancient gathering, the thing that makes them human. So here we are, thousands of years later, in a world that has mostly forgotten how to honor Hestia. We don't have household hearths anymore. We don't swear oaths in her name or carry sacred fire from one home to another. We don't think about her when we turn on the stove or light a candle or gather around a bonfire. But maybe we should. Maybe in our world of constant noise and perpetual demands and the exhausting pressure to be everything to everyone, we need Hestia more than ever. We need the goddess who understood that some things matter more than glory. We need the permission she granted herself to remove herself from the fight, to establish boundaries, to tend her own fire, and let that be enough. We need the reminder that peace is possible, that contentment is real, that you can be essential without being visible, and powerful without being loud, and valuable without constantly proving your worth to people who don't actually care about you. The fire still still burns. Not in temples or altars or sacred spaces that archaeologists can excavate and catalog, but in the small moments when you choose yourself over the crowd, when you say no to something that everyone else says you should want, when you remove yourself from drama that isn't yours and conflict that doesn't serve you and expectations that were never reasonable in the first place. Every time you choose peace over power, every time you establish a boundary and defend it, every time you tend your own small corner of existence instead of trying to control or fix or save the entire world, you're honoring Hestia. You're keeping her fire burning. You're proving that the goddess who disappeared on purpose never really disappeared at all. She just moved to the center, where the truly important things have always been, and waited for us to find her there. In the quiet, in the hearth, in the simple, revolutionary act of being present, being enough, and letting that be everything.